Okay, so the first thing I do is get this thing ready to go. Now, one of the keys is doing this first step. So what I've done is I've cut a piece of Kapton that's approximately the same width as the sample holder. And what I try to aim to do is affix the Kapton so that the sticky side is facing up. So what I do is put the tape here. Yeah, this part's pretty important actually. So I'll put the tape on top like that, and I'll wrap it around like this. And keep in mind now that this is all practice, but when we actually start loading samples for real, any material that you put on here is gonna kind of contaminate your samples. So you gotta be relatively careful at this point. It's still a little clunky, so what I do next, but you can see that the sticky side is up, right? What I do next is I have these like pre-cut pieces that I use, and I put one on top, boom, and one on bottom. So the reason why I do that is just to get it so that things don't move around a whole lot. Okay, so now it's totally on there, right? So the sticky side is up. Like this part is sticky, this part is not. And then what I'll do at the end is I'll actually cut along this line here and this line here, and then I'll be able to pick the whole thing up. This piece of Kapton is there to keep the entire sample holder with the sticky side up Kapton affixed on the mat. Take a little picture. The first thing I do is I cut it there. Oh yeah, these scissors are really good. But I need another tweezer. So take that, put that there. So you do one. Uh-oh, it's a little flimsy. Do another. Put that over there. You do another. Put that over there. That actually looks pretty good. Okay, I got a little bit sloppy there at the end. That's okay. That's why we stack them.
Stack should always be this size?
No, I've just done a little bit. So this is all waste over here. I'm not gonna mess with that. So now I've got everything ready for my strips. So
those are the waste. So
exactly, I'm not using that. That's like excess. I'm trying to kind of match the thickness of the slit. So come back to this, and I'm basically gonna go whoop. So now this is an actual slit. One. So that one's too thick, I think. So I'm gonna do it again. Let's see how that worked. That one is decent. That's not bad. Ooh, that was a good one. I'll do a couple more.
So these are the stacks then.
Exactly, yeah. And you can see that with this size of a filter, you are able to cut tons of these. So what I typically do is I just keep going and going and going and going. Maybe one more. Okay. Okay. So now I've done all of my cutting. And I kind of like look at each one and I'll say like this one's pretty uniform, this one's pretty uniform, and like either this one or this one I like. This one has too much of the filter membrane that's showing, so I'll take these three. This is what I'm going to use. I'm going to use this one, and this one. So now what I do is I put them on top of each other. And this is the trick right here, this move that I'm gonna do right now. So, the last one, I always flip like that.
So last one should always be.
I always do that. So now it's like a sandwich where you have all of the material in between the filter membranes. So you have all of the solids. You have the filter membrane on the bottom, stack, 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 and then flip it so that the filter membrane is both on top and bottom. But you can see that still this stack is basically, it's too wide for the filter slit. And so the next move I do is I take this and I basically I will kind of cut it. So if you press really hard, sometimes this side flies up. So I keep, it worked. Boom. This thing's a nice instrument. Get out of here. And so this is what I'm using for my actual sample. Okay, so you can see all the glycerol that's kind of surrounding that piece. And so I kind of move it around a little bit so that some of the glycerol comes off. And that's fair. That's a good amount. So this is my sample. This needs to go over here. So this last step is a little tricky. It takes practice, and if you mess up, don't worry about it because it'll get easier and easier and easier. But this is also like the most crucial point. So after you've stacked everything, you have one remaining part, and if you mess up, don't worry about it, but try to follow these steps because it'll be a little bit easier, especially if there's no glycerol. Okay, so I wipe off my, okay, you can go down to this one. I wipe off my tweezers, and I've actually cut some pieces of Kapton that should be, you can use your hands for this, relatively close to the diameter that I need. Okay, so if you come over here, if I could do it again, I would use a little bit of a thicker piece. Let's see what this one's like. Okay, so this is a good one. All right, so what I do is I come from directly on top, because especially if you don't have a lot of glycerol, like static is a major issue at these like small scales. And so some of the filters will actually jump up and touch the Kapton itself. So I come from directly on top and I kind of press down. So this one has a lot of glycerol. So it comes up, and then I come over here and I go over the sample. Dang, I'm surprised that was like a perfect one. It almost never does that the first time. It doesn't necessarily need to be the width of the slit, but you know, it can be significantly smaller. So I could have made this stack, this filter stack, quite a bit smaller in the vertical dimension and probably in the horizontal, but it's a good size because it needs to be sticky here. It needs to stick to the Kapton here, and of course top and bottom. And so I wouldn't make the filter necessarily so much larger in the horizontal, but it can be quite small because you remember the sample slit in the slit holder, or in the sample holder, the slit in the sample holder shouldn't necessarily be exactly what the size of the filter membrane is, because the X-ray beam is a very small fraction of this, right? 1 millimeter by 4 millimeters or something like that. So now that remember, this is the sticky side of the Kapton is facing up, and so now I have this Kapton piece with the filter membranes on there in their little sandwich, in their stacked sandwich. And so all I'm gonna do now is kind of press in gently to keep that adhesive part. And so I actually use the back end typically, and I press this part in. Okay, and then the last little thing that I do after I've made it, so I try to make sure that all of the sticky part is adhered, bam. Then the last little bit is I take another piece of Kapton and I kind of go over the seal on top like that. And then I kind of go under the seal, so we need a thin one here. So I don't want to put Kapton necessarily over this sample slit because that's where the next sample is going to go. So there's not, you can see that the Kapton is here, and so there's not a lot of room actually. So all I'm going to do is put this like basically on top.
It's like the top and bottom edges, right?
Absolutely. So you want to get those edges down. Yep. And then kind of push that stuff in a little bit. Boom, done. And you can see, like, don't be scared if you start to see a little bit material kind of like pressing out, because since we stacked them, it doesn't need to be perfect. You're still going to get like relatively homogeneous amounts of iron in the path of the X-ray beam. And because there's glycerol, it's going to kind of look a little bit like muddy in a way. But then you're done with this first one. And so depending on if you have all of your samples produced, like if you have all of your suspensions already generated, you can move on to the next sample already. Okay, so now we have put every single piece on for this sample holder, and so all we do now is a little bit of pruning. So we will cut alongside here, cut along
edges,
side there, cut alongside there. And if we did it right, the whole thing should come right up. And if we cut up here, boom. So this part should peel totally off from the top. Boom. So now we actually, the last little bit is we have our little sandwich here. What I'm going to do is seal this part, this part, this part, and this part using some of these pieces. So I will put and then kind of trim that on that side. There's one.
So the 2 edges.
Yep. And then cut that part. this part. And then do the same.
So put it over for a half, lift it up, and then fold it around.
Yep. Am I in the shot still? Yeah.
Yes, this is perfect. Cut off the outer edges. Do you do it for all sides? or-
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll do it for all. Yeah, the last little bit. Okay. And there. Okay, so the finished product is this little sandwich of Kapton, where it actually is totally encased in the Kapton, and you don't even need a bunch of different sample holders, because since we started like this, it fits on there perfectly like that. And so we can just tape the side onto the sample holder, and we only need to use one. So this one is finished. This one here is finished. We'll go maybe put this in the freezer or something like that, and then we'll start again using this clean one. Again, sticky side of the Kapton facing up,
Yeah.
and just reproduce the whole thing.